Join me, Harriet Gould, for the Lab Matters podcast to hear fascinating stories every week from the inspiring people behind the science. Join me in this episode of Lab Matters as I speak to Stephen Metcalfe MP about how science has gone from zero to hero in Parliament. So today we have with us Stephen Metcalfe MP. Hi, Stephen. Thanks so much for being with us.
My pleasure. Good to see you.
Now, you've been a Member of Parliament for 13 years, and you sat on the Science and Technology Select Committee for nearly 10 years and were chair of that committee for some of that time. And you're still involved in science in Parliament, quite literally, as chair of the all-party parliamentary group for science, that is. So you've had contact with science regulation and legislation for the whole time that you've been a Member of Parliament. And I was wondering if you could give us a bit of an insight into how that came about. How did it start?
Okay, yeah, it's a good question. It's one I get asked because I'm not a scientist and I don't have a particular science background. So I came from the printing industry. That's where I worked for 25 years. And the thing about the printing industry is at the end of every day, you have a large pile of paper with ink on it, hopefully the right ink, which you then go and sell to a satisfied customer. So you get this daily sense of achievement that you're doing something. That isn't necessarily always possible in politics. It's a much slower game. You work on things for long periods. So when I was first elected back in 2010, and there's a tsunami of emails coming in from constituents on every issue under the sun, the phone won't stop ringing and there's posts piling up. I was looking for something where I felt that I could really invest myself and get that sense of achievement of being able to do something and point at it and say, this is all work that I'm doing for the greater good, not just work for my constituents. And so I joined the Science and Technology Committee back in, well, I suppose it would have been late May 2010. And that really has created my focus for the last 13 and whatever years. And as you say, I have been chair of the Science and Technology Select Committee. It's now the Science, Innovation and Technology Committee. We'll come back to that as to why it's changed its name. But as well as that, during that time, I've worked with various science organizations, some of the learned societies, professional bodies, to basically try and create better and closer links between the science community, whatever that means, however you want to see that, and Parliament, particularly parliamentarians, to help them understand that we are living in a world that is changing at a pace that I think, well, certainly I've never experienced in my life. Probably we haven't experienced since, I don't know, the first industrial revolution. It is a very exciting time to be looking at science. There's a whole range of stuff going on. And I think it's important that as parliamentarians who potentially are asked to regulate and invest in these sciences, that we understand what they are, what their impact might be, and how we can use them for the good, in my case as an elected politician, for my constituents.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly sounds like that you had a real vision when you actually put yourself forward to be involved in this area right from the start. So I don't know if now's a good time to go back to why the name of the group changed, or that later.
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, one of the beauties of the Science and Technology Select Committee is it is a formally constituted committee of the House of Parliament, House of Commons. It has clerks, it has professional support, but because it was a non-departmental select committee, and by that I mean it didn't shadow a particular department. It shadowed, or it looked at science policy across all departments, across the whole of government. It was really exciting. As long as you could squeeze the word science into an inquiry, you could look at every department. So it was, how would the Department for Work and Pensions use its evidence base or science? How would the Home Office use science? We could look at everything. And that made it a really broad ranging committee with inquiries in all sorts of different parts of government. Fantastic. However, back at the autumn of last year, just over a year ago now, the government reorganised and created the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. And so we moved from being a non-departmental committee to now shadowing the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology with ministers, etc. So our remit pretty much remains the same. We can look at anything we like. However, we are now shadowing a department, which means we also look at how they operate, their inner workings as well. So that's the big change. And of course, it's also taken in technology, which used to be a shared function between ourselves, and the culture, media and sport also had technology. Digital particularly fell under their remit, and that really has now come to us much more. So we've sort of broadened our focus, and it'll be interesting to see how that influences our inquiries over the coming years.
It will be. It's really interesting to hear that the technology was in the Department of Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, which is now Culture, Media and Sport, because of course technology is so broad and not just digital technology at all.
Exactly. I mean, yeah. So our whole remit has got so much bigger because of these changes. But I do think it's the right place for it. You know, technology, digital, these are well, almost every technology has an aspect of digital in it now, if you think about it. So it probably makes sense that it's all under one roof, and lets us decide, you know, what we want to look at going forward. So yeah, it's going to be an exciting time for the committee, but of course we are in that, you know, strange period in the run up to the election, because it'll all change again after the election, probably.
Quite possibly. Be interesting to see what happens after the election, indeed. It must be quite hard, actually. I'm assuming it must be quite hard carrying on with your work, knowing that's hanging not very far in the future.
Yes, I think as politicians we're kind of used to that. We know that elections come round, and elections are unpredictable things, and you know, we've no idea what will happen. I don't know if I'll still have a job after the election. I hope so. I hope to still be on the committee, still effectively doing what I do now, which is to try and, as I said earlier, promote the interaction. Well, to make sure that government is looking at, you know, the right things when it comes to developments in science, but also to make sure that parliamentarians are brought up to speed as much as possible about the changes that are going on. Because as well as sitting on the Science, Innovation and Technology Committee, I also chair a couple of all-party groups, which are slightly different. Well, they're not slightly, they're very different to select committees. So select committee, constituted by the House, has a formal standing. All-party groups are interest groups. They're where parliamentarians come together and say, we have an interest in a particular issue and we would like to discuss it. We do have to register with Parliament that we are an all-party group, but we don't get any of the support that a select committee might get. And so I chair the Parliamentary and Scientific Committee, which is effectively the all-party group for science. And that was a group that was established back in 1939 with the help of Churchill. And the idea then was to bring the science community and Parliament together to help with the war effort. Because at that time, there were no scientists embedded across government. So now we have government has a chief scientific advisor, the Prime Minister has a panel of scientists that they refer to all the time. Every department is supposed to have a chief scientific advisor embedded in their department. And of course, during the COVID pandemic, we saw these people on television all the time. And they were the ones who were giving us updates on the progress of the virus. But that wasn't the case back in 1939. And so we are the oldest all-party group, quite a rich heritage. We've got a history going back 85 years now. And obviously our function has changed from then. And now I very much see it as that bringing parliamentarians particularly together with scientists. And we do that through regular monthly meetings. Next week, we're holding our STEM for Britain competition, which is a competition for young and early career scientists. They submit a poster to our judging panel, and our judging panel is made up of experts in their field. So even being able to submit a poster and have it reviewed by leaders in a particular field, and that's chemistry, biology, maths, physics, and engineering. Those are the 5 categories effectively that we have posters for. They're whittled down to about 30 in each category. They come into Parliament, they display their poster, they interact with parliamentarians, and they meet the judging panel who will ask them questions about their poster. And then we award prizes to the best research in those 5 categories. And then there is a final prize, which is the one I'm particularly interested in, which is where the 5 winners of the 5 categories have 2 minutes to convey their science, to convey their research to a panel of lay people, i.e. me and other parliamentarians, because it's us who have to potentially make decisions on that science at some point in the future. And so the ability to communicate science to non-scientists is also important as well, if you are going to promote your scientific discoveries and make sure that people understand what you've achieved, and then help it go to its full, meet its full potential.
Mm-hmm. You're here with me, Harriet Gould, for the Lab Matters podcast. If you like what you hear, please rate us on your favourite podcast platform. That's so interesting, and I think you're completely that's completely right. Teaching people and encouraging them from the off that it's not just what you do, it's how you talk about it, how you communicate that. So important. And they've got multiple mediums to do that via these days, which is particularly useful. I wonder if we can just track back slightly to find out how it felt, how different it felt when that seemingly minor change happened, when the department was created and the select committee was specifically related to that department, compared to it was more broad.
Yes. I mean, there was a degree of uncertainty at the time around what exactly this change meant, what the implications were going to be. And at one point, we did end up with 2 science ministers, I think, because we weren't sure which department was, who was the actual science minister. But it all settled down fairly quickly. And I think we are still, a year on, getting our heads around the full impact of the changes. We've always had an interest in digital as a committee, because, as I said earlier, it underpins a lot of science now. It's part and parcel of everything we do. But our role as scrutineer of a department, I think, is still evolving, and we've got to work out exactly how we do that. So we've had the Science Minister in, Secretary of State for Science now, in just before Christmas, which was a very interesting meeting, covered a whole range of subjects, and we will get her back again fairly soon to again scrutinise her thinking, where she thinks the department is going to go. I'm hoping that in the budget, I don't know anything, that there will be announcements of funding for science. There have been in every other budget. Let's hope this is no different, that we continue that record of investment in our sciences. And then we can ask her about how they're going to use any potential monies that have been put aside to make sure that we get the best bang for our buck.
It sounds, like you've got a lot to be thinking about. You must have seen so many things during this whole time that you've been involved, and I wonder if you could share maybe a couple of the best developments that you've seen, maybe scientifically, but also from a legislation perspective. We don't normally get to see that.
No, I mean, it has been, the last 13-14 years have been utterly, breathtaking politically. If you think going back to 2010, we had the first coalition for 80 odd years, which actually did lead to fairly stable government, very stable government for 5 years. We then had the Scottish referendum in 2014, Scottish independence referendum, which surprisingly, I think, didn't go the way the Scots Nats might have wanted it to. And that was probably a surprise. We then had the 2015 election, where The Conservatives won an overall majority, again, which I think was a surprise. Then into the Brexit referendum, then changes of prime ministers, Brexit gridlock, eventually snap election in 2017. Back from that, where we managed to lose our majority altogether. Then there was more turmoil. Then Boris Johnson became prime minister, held another snap election in 2019. Overwhelming majority voted through for Brexit. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. And as soon as we've got past the pandemic, we then stuck with this issue of the world recovery from that economically has impacted on supply chains and interest rates and cost of living, all of which are really difficult issues to deal with. So there's been a major upheaval in politically, but there also has, of course, been some significant achievements scientifically as well. We've seen where can we go back to? So in terms of astronomy, we've now discovered the Higgs boson, which has now given astronomers greater insight into how the universe is made up. But of course, it's created a whole new set of questions as to what do we look at next. So now our friends at CERN are looking at the future circular collider. I think that's what it's called, the FCC, that will supersede the Large Hadron Collider. So that's a new project. I think that's quite exciting. I've been to CERN a couple of times. One of my most exciting things to say, been to see the world's biggest machine. And each time I've gone, they have managed to increase the output, the speed at which they are accelerating particles before they collide them. And it is, it's an extraordinary piece of engineering, delivering some quite interesting, exciting results. And so I wish them luck with their project to build an even bigger one so that we can learn more about the universe. I think things like genomics, gene therapy, those areas have moved from or are beginning to show real potential as to what they could do to treat disease and potentially eradicate some diseases. There's always an ethical debate about eradicating diseases. And that, of course, that does need quite a lot of regulation around. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you necessarily should do it, because once we understand how we can edit our own genome, that brings a whole new set of questions about whether you should be allowed to get rid of certain traits. And then there is this line of when does a trait become a disease or a condition? All those sorts of things are areas that we have to discuss and potentially regulate on. I think one of the most recent and exciting developments, and I say exciting because I've been looking at this for some time, is of course the explosion of AI. So I established the all-party group, which is similar to the Parliamentary and Scientific Committee group on AI back in 2016 with a colleague in the House of Lords. So I've been looking at this for 8 years now, but it's suddenly in the last year, it's moved off the technology pages of the papers and onto the front pages. It's always been science fiction before, a great starting point for some fabulous films and books, etc. But now we are really trying to deal with what does it mean to have super intelligent AI available, and it's only going in one direction. So we have to be able to learn to live alongside that. We can't uninvent it. The technology is not going to go away. What do we do to make sure that it is developed and deployed safely and ethically for the benefit of all of us, without disadvantaging any particular group or allowing it to run amok entirely on its own? And these are questions that the governments around the world have got to get to grips with. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking, you must have it must be quite challenging to come up with a set of, I don't know, guidelines, if you want, when it comes to regulation on AI, in terms of how does it affect free market, or how does it affect fair business, and especially when that business can be more and more done internationally. How on earth do you coordinate that with international governments? Where do you begin?
Well, yeah, where do you begin? So I think you begin using the national and international regulations that you already have in place. So, for example, we have some excellent regulators in the UK who would, the Competition and the Markets Authority in this particular case, are very good. They look at what is happening in the markets, and they try to make sure that we as consumers are not disadvantaged by companies operating as cartels or creating monopolies. Now that regulation exists, and it exists regardless of whether you use an AI in your business or not. That regulation still applies. So what the government here in the UK has done is it's put aside money to help the regulators equip themselves to be able to deal with an AI-enabled world, to make sure that the regulators understand the impact that AI could have, will have, and that they can apply that regulation to businesses who are using AI. And I think that's the right approach. So that will also apply potentially internationally. And I think the safety summit that the Prime Minister convened back in the autumn of last year was the start of that international discussion on AI. The primary purpose of the safety summit was to talk about frontier AI, which is where unchecked AI in the hands of bad actors could potentially turn an amateur criminal into an expert criminal. And what we wanted to be able to achieve, and we did, was access to these models, these large language models, before they're released to the general public. And that will allow security services, etc., access to them to check or to test them for that kind of safety. But this is a global discussion. That caravan has now moved on. It's now moved on to South Korea, and then it's off to France. So this is not a UK, it's a UK initiative to start with, but it needs to be a global, the international community needs to take responsibility and own this, because AI is something that will cross borders in the blink of an eye. And we all have to learn to live alongside it. But there are incredible opportunities that come with this use of AI, and AI becoming more mainstream. It's almost impossible to think of an area where AI won't have an impact to improve things, whether that's in medical screening, the search for new antibiotics, as we try and deal with the issue of antimicrobial resistance, pattern spotting for diseases, potentially allowing us as individuals to be more creative, more productive. And so I think rather than it completely displace people from work, which is one of the big concerns, what it will do is augment our working lives, and we will work alongside AI to do more of the things that we as humans are good at, and the more mundane, repetitive tasks we can involve an AI to help us do. So I just think it's going to be an exciting future, as long as we can get the regulation and the safety rails in place to make sure it's operating safely without bias and not disadvantaging any particular group of people.
Do you use AI in your current position?
That would be telling. Yes, of course I do. I mean, we all use it. I think people don't realize how often they are interacting with AI, whether it's turning on their streaming service to make suggestions. You pick up your phone, it suggests apps and stuff that you might want to use in the morning. And yes, I do use ChatGPT from time to time, because it's a great way of bringing a whole range of information together in one place. I don't necessarily then use it to write a speech and make that speech verbatim, but it's a great starting point. Mm-hmm. Used it, yeah. Why wouldn't you? I suppose would be the answer. Embrace it, yeah, and then learn what it can and cannot do. It's not perfect, and that's why there's a human element to this. in that I then go through what it said and decide which bits of it I want to use. And that's why I'm not entirely convinced, this is just me speaking, and I don't speak for the government, that when the government departments say you shouldn't use it to help in your day-to-day work, I think that isn't necessarily the right way forward. I think what we need is training to understand that just because an AI has created something doesn't make it perfect, but it is a way of getting some information pretty rapidly that you can then apply your expertise to edit it into a form that you want, but it may make you more productive.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. You mentioned a moment ago about there being, the scientific advisors throughout government. I wondered if you had any insight as to how they're chosen, what goes into selecting such advisors.
Yes, as I don't have great insight, but as I understand it, there is each department advertises that they are looking for a chief scientific advisor. They talk to those people they already get science advice from. So that might be the learned societies, that might be the professional organizations, to see if there's anyone who might be recommended. And then they go before a panel and are interviewed and appointed. I mean, it's a part-time. It's not, I believe it's part-time in most departments. And so it's in addition to whatever someone else might be doing. I suspect at times it does take over. But yeah, I believe they are advertised. So it's always worth having a look on if there are scientists out there who think they've got something to offer to individual departments, then it's always worth keeping a view on the gov.uk website for potential job opportunities.
Good tip. And just before we finish, I wondered if, and this is from a personal perspective as well as a professional one, and I realise the two are slightly merged when you're a member of parliament, but I wonder what's your vision for the future? And again, I don't want to bring up the election, but with science as the centre point, what's your vision for the future personally / professionally?
What I hope is that we continue to see our scientists and our science sector supported from whichever government is in power after the election, that there is recognition of the huge achievements they have made and the huge contribution they can make to tackling some of the really big problems that we all face nationally and internationally. That could be climate change, food security, improving people's lives around the world, because that is in all our interests, to make sure that we have a safe and secure world. And then on a sort of, that's the vision, is that we continue to support them as best we can, and that we maintain our status as I believe, as a science superpower. What I hope is that we also see some of the investments and discoveries that we have made here in the UK actually come to commercial fruition. Things like, we've been talking about nuclear fusion for a long time. If you go to Cullen, you can see fantastic demonstrators of a potential power source that would be inexhaustible and clean and safe. I hope that I get to see that actually reach its full potential and become mainstream and start to be rolled out across the world. I hope that we see, continue to see advances in medical sciences, that some of the exciting early research that's being done now is seen all the way through, that goes to trial and develops drugs, and we start to tackle things like dementia, which is a really horrible, tragic condition, disease that people suffer from and takes away our loved ones towards the end of their life. And there is great work being done on that. So it's those sorts of things where there is huge potential, and I want to see that potential realized, and I want to see it realized here in the UK, because it creates rewarding, valuable jobs, valuable to society, but also rewarding for the individuals who take them up, and where we become a nation who respects, values science, where instead of talking about football in the pub, people are talking about the latest scientific achievements. Now that might be a little bit of a stretch, but hey, it's worth. I mean, you can see my inner nerd coming to the fore here.
That would be one hell of a shift.
I can never decide if I'm a nerd or a geek. There must be a definition out there somewhere.
Yeah, I think there is, but I who knows what it is. Anyway, let's see that. We'll have to go for a drink one day in the future and see what they're talking about in the pub, football or science.
Absolutely.
Well,
I regularly go to the pub, and I'm going to be honest with you, it's more about football at the moment.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. Look, Stephen, thank you so much. It's really kind of you to spend time with us, and thanks for having a chat.
No, thank you for inviting me along to talk to you. Brilliant.